Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with part 2 of my September wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below if you haven't seen that yet, but let's jump into the books I read for the second half of September. The first one was Girls on the Line by Amy K. Runyon. This is a historical fiction novel set during World War I, and we follow our main character Ruby, who is from a pretty well-to-do family in Philadelphia, and after her brother is killed in the war very early in the book, she decides that she's going to use her skills, her language and other skills that she learned at finishing school to sign up to become one of the Hello Girls, who were from the United States, sent abroad in France, and their job was to basically be the telephone operators for the army bases, and to communicate, to translate and decode messages and pass those on. So they were really important in the war effort. So this book follows Ruby as she joins up with them. She goes overseas and she's actually engaged to somebody back home, so the more personal side of the conflict comes because she starts spending time with this army medic named Andrew, so things kind of go on from there. So this was a very middle of the road book for me. There were quite a few things I liked about it. I really enjoyed the historical aspects, specifically like the setting details and the background we got on Ruby's job and what she and the other Hello Girls did. Those were actually some of my favorite parts. I wish we had gotten more scenes of them working because it was so interesting to see how they made connections and how they did this really high pressure job. Like some of the things that they had to do, like memorizing these codes that they had just gotten that day, and the knowledge that their work could be the difference between somebody living or dying and between a group of soldiers getting where they needed to go or getting picked off by German fire. Like I wish we had gotten more focus on their job, and it's just infuriating to think about the fact that these women did so much for the war effort and they were treated like they were in the army, like they had to wear uniforms, they had to adhere to all of these guidelines and strict rules, and then after the war they did not qualify for veteran benefits because the government was like, actually, you're not really soldiers. Yeah, we know we treated you like soldiers, but we're not going to give you benefits or treat you like heroes for your country, so sorry. So that was really infuriating. I really appreciate that the author included a note at the back kind of about that fight. It was actually only a couple decades ago that they finally won their fight in Congress about getting recognized, and at that time most of them had already died. So I really appreciate that historical context. This book was also definitely quick to read. I liked a few of the side characters. Ruby had a friend who I can't remember her name. It might have been Marie. She had one friend in particular who I just really enjoyed. She was really fun. And there were also particular scenes that I really enjoyed in this book that really stood out to me. There's one where Ruby and Andrew, they visit some French villages, one of them that was the birthplace of Saint Joan of Arc, which I thought was a really great scene. There's also one of my favorite scenes is actually when, so Ruby ends up being kind of in command of her group of women. So she's a commanding officer, and Andrew says something that insults her and detracts from her authority in front of her subordinates, in front of the group. And it's because he's upset about finding out that she's engaged and there's other reasons for it. And then afterwards, he does apologize to her and he says something about, I'm sorry I was being so rude and just an idiot, and please let me take you out to dinner and apologize and everything. And his apology is nice, but Ruby reacts with wow, it must be really nice to be a man. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, if I had been a man and you had done this to me, it's not something you could just sweet talk me out of. She's like, you interfered with my authority in front of my subordinates. She's like, I'm a commanding officer. If I were a man, you would not be able to get away with that by just taking me out to dinner or whatever. And he's really taken aback by that, and that scene I think was just really well done. I think that the book did a good job of showing the obstacles that these women faced just because they were women. So there were definitely things I liked about this book, but unfortunately I feel a lot of these central elements of this book were pretty bland. Ruby's a main character. I definitely liked how competent she was, and just the women overall. I really liked how just brilliant at their jobs they were, which makes sense, because they had to go through all of this testing and all of this training, so of course they would be good at their jobs. But it was just really nice to read about women being great at what they do. There's no drastic mistake for false drama that didn't really make sense. But Ruby as a character, I just found her not super interesting or engaging. I don't feel like she had a lot of personality. And Andrew also, he was fine. As a love interest, he was pretty unobjectionable, I guess, but he was just very bland, I think, for the most part. And I also didn't really like the writing. It did move quickly, which I liked, but just, I don't know, the overall style didn't really work for me. And as far as the plot, I actually liked that that the book went past the end of the war, so we really see the aftermath and the struggle of a lot of a lot of not just Americans, but people in general who had fought in the war, who had been involved in the war in some way, their difficulty in adjusting to normal life. I also think the subplot with Ruby's fiance, I think some choices about that were actually very interesting. Some of them were frustrating, but I think they were more realistic, and I was kind of impressed that the author like did that. So yeah, like kind of a mixed experience with this one. I feel like I've talked about it much longer than a middle of the road book might usually suggest. So I gave Girls on the Line 3 stars. I think like if you're pretty new to historical fiction especially, this might be a great one, or if you're specifically interested in this time period or the Hello Girls, I definitely think it's worth reading, but like the actual like characters and romance and everything, not the best in my opinion. Next, I finished Running by Natalie Sylvester. In this book, we follow our main character Mariana, and she lives in Florida, and her father is a senator who is, at the beginning of this book, he has decided to run for president, so he's starting his campaign. And Mariana has, even though her family life is not always easy, in a lot of ways she's very privileged and very lucky, and she's kind of had the advantage of being able to stay out of politics and to be very disengaged with politics. And this book is about her realizing that and waking up to that and starting to really think about what she believes and to realize that she doesn't agree with all the things that her family believe or agree with. And this is a book about using your privilege to make a positive difference. It's about deciding what you believe, and I really liked this. This is a very focused book in a sense, because this book is really all about Mariana and her journey of like self-discovery. Like that sounds kind of cheesy, but that's really kind of what it feels like. It's about her coming to terms with the fact that people she loves might be part of some really terrible things, and how scary it can be for her to stand up for what is right when most of the people she knows or has been close to for so long don't think that it's right. This is definitely a book about young people getting involved. And like I mentioned in my 3 YA political contemporaries review, this book doesn't have any romance, which I think is a real point in this book's favor, even though like I definitely love a well-done romantic subplot. I don't think this book needed one. I think it would have detracted from the power of this story if we had like spent some of this page time on a love interest. So like I said, I really liked the themes and the focus of this book, and I think that the relationships were also very complex. Like seeing Mariana navigate these relationships that she has had or forming new relationships, I just think those were really well done. And the fact that like, I think one of the things this book also does is show that like people who do bad things or like bad people are not necessarily like mean to everybody. Like that sounds weird, but like I think this book did a really great job of showing like somebody can be a really polite person or a really loving parent or sibling or whatever and still be a part of a lot of awful things. This book also had a focus on environmentalism, which I thought was really great, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. Really the only thing that I didn't love so much is I feel like there were some of the scenes surrounding the group of people that Mariana ends up becoming like kind of friends with. I feel like some of those scenes were kind of clunky, for lack of a better word. Like it felt like they were like set up as pieces to like help Mariana's journey a little bit, but that feeling definitely went away as the book went on. I actually really liked some of the way things with those characters or that part of the plot developed, so I really enjoyed Running and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I finished Virgin, which is a collection of poems by Annalicia Sotelo, and this is going to be a pretty quick review because I actually haven't rated this. Like I've said before when I talk about poetry that I think I would get more out of this if I read it again, because I think poems really do lend themselves well to rereading, and that's what happened here. I haven't even rated this collection on Goodreads because I think I read it too quickly, and I don't think it would be fair to rate my experience based on my like how I read it the first time. But I definitely liked the title poem, which is, I think, Do You Speak Virgin? I thought that was really great. I unsurprisingly really liked some of the mythological centered poems. So yeah, I will need to reread this one before I can, I think, more thoroughly review it, but I did read this collection of poems. Next, I finished You Had Me At Ola by Alexis Daria. This is a romance novel that I buddy read with my friend Taylor at Page Screen Taylor. I had a lot of fun buddy reading it with her, and we both really enjoyed this. So this is a romance novel about our 2 main characters, Jasmine and Ashton. And Ashton is a telenovela star, and Jasmine does American soap operas, and they're cast opposite each other in this kind of like, it's kind of like a Netflix streaming service-esque new TV series, and they both have reasons for not wanting to get involved with each other, like with not wanting to date co-workers at all. Jasmine because she wants to be more than like tabloid fodder, essentially, because she's faced a lot of like criticism in the press and the media for her personal life, and she's just tired of it. And Ashton for reasons that we find out later on in the book. But of course there is a chemistry between them, and I really liked this overall. I really loved the scenes where they're actually like filming the TV show. I just really love the focus on acting in general and how that's treated as a real career and like a really difficult job. Like it's just like I feel like Alexis Daria was so like respectful almost of like it as a profession and as an art form and as something that is not easy to do. So I really loved those scenes and just the way that acting and everything was discussed. It was also really cool because I don't know that much about like telenovelas or like soap operas or anything, so to see Ashton and Jasmine's experiences with those was really interesting. I liked Ashton and Jasmine's interactions. Most of the scenes that I liked with them were like the pre-romance scenes. Like there's just like a couple scenes of them just like communicating. I think they had like some of the best chemistry in the book. And one of the conflicts of this book is that they're both trying to stay so distant from each other that it starts affecting their performance. And so the intimacy coordinator of this show kind of starts working with them, and they start working together off camera by themselves to try and like improve their chemistry, which I also really liked the inclusion of the intimacy coordinator. That's not a job I had heard of before, but I think that is so cool and so important, and like I hope that more shows, more like real life shows, actually start doing that. I also really liked the focus on family. I really love Jasmine's cousins, especially. Like they're kind of like her support group, and like the rest of her family is not always super supportive of her acting career. So for Jasmine to have her cousins as like kind of her like home base, and just like the way that they like supported each other and cheered each other on, and just seeing them hang out was a ton of fun. I did also like Jasmine and Ashton as main characters. I thought they were both good leads. And I also really liked the ending, like the very end. That like final couple of scenes made my heart all fuzzy, so that was really nice. But I did have some things I didn't love as much with this book. So one of them was the actual like sex scenes and the way those were written. And like this is something that is very personal preference, so take this with a grain of salt. But the main reasons I didn't really like those is partly word choice. There are some very popular romance words right now that I just hate. There was one of them that was used 3 times in this book, and I was like, that's enough. And another reason is like I feel like there was weird things that we were given a lot of detail about, if that makes sense. Like it made me think about how Sam from Thoughts on Tomes, like a couple years back, she was talking about how when she reads romance, like when she's reading romance and specifically when she's talking about sex scenes, she likes to know what's happening, but she doesn't want to feel like she's in the room while it's happening. And that's kind of what this book made me think of. It's like it felt very almost like voyeuristic in a way. That sounds weird to say, but like I don't know, the specific things that we were given a ton of detail about were things that like I didn't feel like we needed to know, and they were not super romantic in my opinion. So yeah, like that's like a very personal preference thing. I also feel like the motivations for Jasmine and Ashton could have been a little more varied. Like I understand why both of them have this like single-minded focus. Like that's kind of the point, is like they're very focused on making sure this show goes well and not getting involved with each other and everything. But it kind of made their internal monologue pretty repetitive at times. Like I get why, especially on Ashton's side, I get why this is something that you would kind of filter all of your choices through, but as a reader it kind of made some of it a little bit repetitive. And then the last like kind of big thing that I didn't like is the main conflict of this book that happens near the end, or like specifically Jasmine's choices in regards to that conflict, I thought was incredibly out of character and really like I just didn't like it. I found it hard to believe that Jasmine would risk the show and risk the livelihood of everybody working on the show, like for her own like self-gratification essentially. So yeah, I didn't really like that either. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun, and I gave You Had Me At Ola 4 stars. Next, I finished Punching the Air by Ibizuboi and Yusuf Salam, who is one of the Exonerated 5. And this is a novel in verse about a main character, Amal, who gets convicted of a crime that he didn't commit and gets sent to prison. And this is about his experiences in prison. It's also about mass incarceration and the prison system in the United States. There's also some like illustrations throughout because Amal is an artist, and that's one of the things that kind of starts becoming a touchstone for him, where he can kind of use it to express his feelings or process his feelings and kind of like make it through this incredibly difficult time. And I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Shout out to my friend Hannah, who kind of like bumped this up my TBR list when she did a review on her blog. I will link that down below. but I thought this was just an incredible book. Like I said, it is a novel in verse, and I think that it was used so effectively because it's a very kind of spare feeling verse style. It's not overly descriptive or overly flowery. It's like a very immediate feeling kind of poetry, and I think that that contributed so much to the emotional impact of this story, and getting to know the characters of this story. And it was interesting because when I first started reading this book, I was really impressed by it. I was really liking it, but I kind of felt like we weren't getting as connected to the emotions that Amal was feeling. Like, this was obviously a really intense situation, and it felt kind of, the writing felt a little bit separated from that. But I started realizing that I think that was a really deliberate and smart choice on the author's part, because having this straightforward verse style, it like, that distancing was because Amal himself was figuring out how to work through his emotions, and the like simple style of the verse ended up feeling really perfect for the story because it made the emotional connections feel very immediate and very raw. I don't know if I'm explaining this well at all, but I basically thought the verse elements were done brilliantly. I feel like Amal as a character was so great and so well developed, and this is obviously a very difficult book to read at times, but I think that it dealt with so many important themes and topics so brilliantly and so well. And I think that the like smaller scenes within this book, like seeing some side characters, like there's an art teacher who comes to the prison, and Amal ends up using this class as another way to kind of process his anger and his grief and to get back into art. Also seeing the letters that Amal gets, like just all of these like small scenes or characters who were like pretty minor, because like this is, even though it looks long, it's in verse, so this is a very quick read. I read it all in one night. So in a sense, like some of these characters, they're not in Amal's life very long, but you still feel like you really know them and like you can see their importance in his life. Like I said, even the very minor characters I think were very well drawn, and very specifically characterized. So yeah, I thought this was an absolutely brilliant book. Like I said, it's very intense. It deals with themes of racism and incarceration and being accused of crimes you didn't commit, which obviously Yusuf Salam is drawing on his own experiences from that, and I just highly recommend this book. I gave Punching the Air 5 stars. Next, I finished a picture book, and that is Hair Love by Matthew A. Cherry, illustrated by Vashti Harrison, who is an illustrator I love. And I feel like a lot of people know about this picture book. It's been getting a lot of well-deserved praise and attention, and I also adored this. It's about a young black girl whose father is doing her hair, and the like bonding that gives them, and I just loved this. I loved the art, I loved the story, I loved the ending of this book. It's very short, so I don't really have a lot to say, but like basically if you've been hearing people talk about this picture book and you hadn't really committed to like trying to pick it up, I thought this was absolutely lovely and heartwarming and beautiful, and I gave Hair Love 5 stars. Next, I finished Star Daughter by Shweta Tharkar. This is a contemporary fantasy book. Our main character Sheetal is half star, so her mother is a star and her father is a human, and Sheetal's star powers and the like visual clues that she's a star, like her bright silver hair, are becoming harder and harder to conceal. And then one day there's a terrible accident and her father is grievously injured, so he's in a coma, and the only way for Sheetal to save him is to journey to her mother and her celestial family, like the court in the stars basically, and to get her help so that she can heal her father. So I absolutely adored Shweta Tharkar's short story, In a Thousand Beginnings and Endings. Hers was one of my favorites, so I was really excited about this, and I did really like this book overall. I really liked Sheetal as a main character. I really liked the parts of the story that involved kind of like the politics of this like celestial court, and Sheetal like learning more about her family and the secrets that her family has been keeping from her. I really liked those aspects, and I also ended up liking some parts of the competition, because I forgot to mention that part of the summary is when Sheetal gets to her celestial family, she finds herself becoming part of a competition that she obviously like didn't sign up for, didn't really have any knowledge of or plans to participate in. So like those parts, I think some of those were interesting, and like I said, especially kind of the almost like mystery aspects of this book. I also really loved the way that Hindu stories and Indian culture and folklore were brought into this book and were a very prominent focus of this book. I also really liked some of the themes in this novel, like things about art and inspiration, because that's one of the things that the stars do, is they inspire humans to create art. There's also this one theme that I wasn't really expecting from this book, that it wasn't like the main point of the story, but it was there, it was present, which was about basically the choice of having a perfect world or having a world with free will. and I thought that was really interesting. And kind of transitioning into the things I had mixed feelings about, like this book definitely had a very strong aesthetic, very lush and rich in description, and some of that I think was good, but some of that I think kind of detracted from the story. Like, there are definitely like beautiful descriptions, and like the setting of this story is just like so like rich and magnificent, and I did like learning about that setting a little bit more, but I do feel like that kind of slowed down the plot a little bit, and it made some parts of the story kind of drag a little bit more, because I felt like there was a chunk of this book where Shatha was just like kind of wandering around and like noticing how opulent everything was, which I didn't really find as interesting, and even the competition part it wasn't as like exciting as it kind of sounded like it was going to be. Like I said, I did like some parts of the competition, and once we got into more of the like politics of this court and the mystery aspects, or like the secret aspects, I became much more engaged in the plot. But like I said, some parts of the story really dragged, especially the beginning. That was another thing, is that I think the beginning could have been a lot shorter. Like, it's more than 100 pages before we even get to Shatha's father being injured and her having to go to the celestial court. And I think some of that setup was important because we kind of get situated in this contemporary fantasy and like getting to know the characters and some of Shatha's family history. So I do think we needed some introduction, but it just felt like we didn't need nearly as much as we got. Like, I think the beginning definitely dragged. And then my other major complaint was the love interest. I think he just wasn't as developed as he needed to be, considering what an important part of the story he ended up being. Because I didn't realize he was going to be such an important character in the book, and then when I realized that he was, I kind of kept waiting for him to get developed more, and I don't really feel like that happened. I did kind of warm up to the romance a little bit as the book went on, but just as a character, I don't think he was like that well developed. So yeah, like I said, some mixed feelings about this one, but overall I did really like Star Daughter. Really excited to see what Fate the Tharkar writes next, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Next, I finished Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was the first book for our Past It Classics read-along. The live show was hosted by Taylor over on her channel, so I will link that down below. So definitely check that out for more of our like in-depth spoilery opinions. But where do I start with this book? So Wuthering Heights is one of those books where a lot of people hate it, and when I hear people talk about why they hate it, I'm like, this is 100% valid. But somehow I just like this book anyway. I have a lot of feelings about this. So this is a story about the twisted, tragic, messed up love between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, and kind of the fallout from that, and how they kind of make each other miserable and ruin other people's lives along the way. And yeah, so basically like this stranger shows up in town and gets told the story of these families, and that's how we as the reader find out what has happened. And that's kind of like the basic overview, but I feel like a lot of the things that I love about this book and that I think make this book worth it, even though it is very like bleak and depressing and frustrating at times, are things not related to that like core premise. For one thing, I love the writing of this book. I think Emily Bronte has a real gift for writing about characters that you don't like and relationships that you don't want to be invested in really, really beautiful ways. And I think that that matters because, like, even though so many of these characters are terrible people, and even though, like, arguably none of them deserve a happy ending, the way that she writes about these characters' love for each other, it makes you care just a tiny bit. Like, not that it excuses these characters or anything. As you'll see in our live show, like, we do not excuse these characters at all. But for all of them, there's like this tiny flicker of sympathy that you have for them at least once. And I think that's really impressive considering how awful these people are. And just like some of the beautiful lines in this book, like, whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Like, I think they're famous for a reason. I think those are beautiful lines. I also think that the characters are very interesting, even though a lot of them suck. They like capture my imagination. Like, there's something about this book that just like holds on to my feelings in ways that are sometimes hard for me to explain. And another thing I'll say is, even though the central romantic relationship is twisted and toxic and messed up, and I don't excuse it, I think I find it believable. And what I mean by that is that I believe that Catherine and Heathcliff love each other enough to cause this plot of this book to happen, to cause all of this disaster and tragedy and misunderstandings and things like that. So the fact that even if I don't condone their relationship, I at least understand why it happened and why it's important to them, and believe that it could cause the rest of this book to happen, I think that is a point in this book's favor, because it makes this like very dramatic story feel believable. And I also really like the ending of this book. I find it very, very cathartic. And it ends in a really beautiful and, like, compared to the rest of the story, it ends in a very, I think, hopeful way. And I think that, like, some of the themes in this book I really love too. Like, I think this book kind of goes against this Victorian idea of children always turning out like their parents. And I think that this book, and especially the end, shows how you are your own person, and that doesn't always happen. I think the ending of this book also, in a way, is about second chances, kind of. I also think that the gothic atmosphere of this book is really on point. And like I said, the emotional investment and like the emotional payoff, I guess, I think is really strong in this book. I definitely am like a feelings first kind of reader, so I think that's one of the reasons this book works for me. But I do have some things that I didn't like, so let me talk about those. Like, the whole beginning chunk of this book, and arguably scenes scattered throughout the rest of the book, are incredibly bleak and depressing, and overly detailed in how bleak and depressing they are. And I think that, like, some of that could have been shortened, so I fully acknowledge that this book can be very depressing at times. And like I said, a lot of these characters are really unlikable, and I think, like, some of them are unlikable in ways where I don't think they're even interesting unlikable. Like Joseph, we talked about how, like, Joseph as a character just feels kind of unnecessary, partly because Emily Bronte wrote his dialogue completely unintelligibly, but also just because, like, as a character, he's just kind of awful and, like, for no reason, and just, like, he's just around, and doesn't really contribute a lot to the story. So I definitely don't think that all of the characters are as, like, rich and, like, well created and everything, as some of them are. And kind of related to the characters, there are some that I just hate so much that it's hard for me to acknowledge their, like, value in this story. Like the younger Linton, everybody, like, has the same names as each other because they all, like, marry their cousins. So I can't really remember which Linton he was. Was it Linton Heathcliff, I think? Anyway, yeah, he's, like, I initially felt very sorry for him, and then by the end I was like, I hate you probably almost as much as I hate Heathcliff. So there are definitely some elements that I just straight up disliked that kept me from, like, fully enjoying this book, because it's not, like, a favorite or anything. I gave it 3.5 stars, but it's just, I don't know, there's something about this book that just has a hold on my feelings. And I feel like I rambled about it way longer than I planned to. And I also think that my expectations for this book going in, I think that really contributed to my enjoyment as well, because the first time I read it, which was a few years ago, I went in knowing it wasn't a romance and not to expect that, and also knowing that a lot of people hated it, so I think that kind of, like, primed me to enjoy this more. Also the fact that I had no idea about the plot, like, I didn't know what was going to happen in the story, that kind of made it exciting or engaging too. So yeah, I absolutely understand why so many people hate this book, but I still like it. Next, I finished Antígona González by Sarah Uribe, translated by John Plecker, and this is a very short bilingual kind of play or performance piece. Sorry, I didn't explain this. I'm showing you that each page there is the Spanish on one side and the English translation on the other side, so this is a bilingual story, and it is a retelling or adaptation of the Greek tragedy Antigone by Sophocles, which is one of my favorite plays, and this piece takes that story and reframes it into the context of missing and murdered people in Mexico, and like those disappearances. And I thought this was so brilliant. I talked about it in a recent video, and one thing I mentioned is initially when I first read this, I was surprised that some of the context that the book gives you at the back, I was surprised that wasn't at the front of the book, about like why the writer chose to use certain things and how they use certain things, and basically like how she put the story together. But in hindsight, I actually think that was a really smart decision to put it where she did, because by not having that context, I think it makes you kind of make your own guesses about context. Like, by not having that guide at the beginning, I think it makes you approach the story in a different way and in a more open way, which I think is actually really great. I think the concept and the themes are just really well done. Like, I think that Antigone works so well as this kind of story. I also thought the structure was really effective. Like, some of these are very short passages, and there's like really interesting ways of breaking up the text, which again I don't want to say too much about because I think some of it is important that you kind of make guesses about as you go. So yeah, I thought this was absolutely brilliant. It's a really, really quick but really powerful read. And I gave Antígona González 4.5 stars, but on reread, I would be very surprised if this didn't end up as a 5 stars, because I think going through and reading this beginning to end and then getting that context at the end and then like rereading everything with that context in mind, I think that both of those experiences put together are going to give me like even more appreciation for this story. So yeah, I thought this was absolutely fantastic. And finally, the last book I finished in September was Throw Like a Girl by Sarah Henning. So in this book we follow our main character Liv, who is a brilliant softball player, but because of her getting into a fight with somebody at a game in defense of one of her family members, she ends up getting banned from the team, and as a result she loses her scholarship, so she gets kicked out of the private school that she was attending, so she has to go to public school, and if she wants any chance of getting on the softball team at her new school, I think is what she's trying to do, she has to show the coach that she can actually be a team player. So because of like a series of circumstances, what that ends up meaning is that Liv ends up filling in for the star quarterback on the football team because of Liv's experience with softball. She's really great at throwing and like a lot of the other skills associated with football, and there's no rules against it, so she ends up filling in for him, and in exchange he'll kind of put in a good word for her with the coach that she's trying to impress. And so they end up spending a lot of time together and starting to have romantic feelings for each other. Liv is struggling to be accepted by the other football players, and she's also dealing with some family things, and there are also some obstacles that come up in her and Gray, the quarterback she's filling in for. There's some things that come up regarding their relationship as well. And I really liked this overall. This was really fun and cute and sweet, but also with some depth, which I really enjoyed. I absolutely loved the family relationships in this book, like Liv's bond with her family, like with her younger brother and her parents and her older sister, and just like everything about that I really, really loved. It was really great to see her have such a strong support network, even if they sometimes disagreed about what was best for Liv or about what would make her happy. You could always tell that they were coming from a place of love and care for her. I liked Liv as main character. I really liked her friends and her friend group, like her best friend in particular. I can't remember her name because I had to return the library book, but I really, really loved her, and I wish we had had more of her in the book actually. That was one of my criticisms, is like, I really, really liked her and I wish she had gotten more time. This was also a really compelling book. Like, I didn't expect this to be like a page turner necessarily. I don't know why, but it ended up being like really compelling. Like, I wanted to see how Liv and Gray's relationship developed. I wanted to see how some conflicts with the team or with her family would work out. And I also liked the way that this book did address the reality of brain injuries in football, because I honestly don't think you can tell a story about American football and not do that. I think that would be disingenuous and frankly irresponsible, to write a book about the sport and not at all mention the like horrible consequences and the fact that teams are still not doing enough to protect their players. And I like that this book did kind of confront that a little bit, even in this kind of like light rom-com atmosphere. There were a couple things I felt kind of mixed on, like the writing. Sometimes I liked it and sometimes it felt kind of disjointed or clunky. Like sometimes the sentence structure felt a little bit awkward. And then also the romance I had mixed feelings about, because I liked it some of the time, but I also like wanted to like it more than I did, I guess. I don't know, like I liked Gray, he was sweet, I liked seeing their relationship, but I just didn't love it, I guess, like I was hoping to. And like I said, I also wish we had gotten to spend a little more time with some of the side characters, especially Liv's friend. I also think this book is a really great example of how you can have a diverse cast of characters and not make it like an issue book. Not that those books aren't important, but sometimes it's nice to read a like cute kind of rom-com story, and one of the important supporting characters is Black, and the main character's older sister is a lesbian. We do hear about Liv's older sister having to deal with some ignorant and bigoted people, so it's not that it doesn't matter, it's not that their identity doesn't matter, but it's not like the focus of the book. So overall, I really liked this book. I thought this was a good blend of cute and fun, but also with some more serious topics or themes, and I gave Throw Like a Girl 3.75 stars. Okay everybody, so those are the rest of the books I read in September. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. And let me know a book that you love that you hear people talk about why they hate it and you're like, you are right, and I still like it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!